All right, everyone. Welcome. I am going to just kick us off because we are a little bit behind here and just quickly run through a couple of these housekeeping slides. My name is Zach Stewart, and I am your producer for today's event. This is the first event in the Engaging Subpopulations of Clients Experiencing Homelessness with SMI or CODs, Bridging Cultural and Social Lines. I just want to let you know that this event is being recorded and audio is now broadcasting. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services or the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We are going to be providing live captioning for today's event, and you're going to access that captioning via this link. Our captioners should be coming in just a moment here if they are not already. So you're going to click on that link to open a new box or window anywhere on your screen. You can position that anywhere you like, and you can adjust the size, color, and speed of the captions. And I am also going to put this link in the All Questions box located right beneath the slides there, so you can access that throughout the event. Your line is going to be muted for today's event. But you do have a couple ways where you can communicate with us. That first is going to be the public chat box. I see many of you are already typing in there. That's going to be located to the right of our slides today, on the right side of your screen. Just be aware that anything you type in that box is visible to everybody in the room. We also have that All Questions box located right beneath the slides there. Please do use that for your tech and content questions today. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's event, and we are going to save all content questions for that time, but we will answer your tech questions right in that box if you experience any issues. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to our moderator today, Kate Rio. Kate, can you verify that you are with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for your patience. These are challenging times in many ways, and for people experiencing homelessness who have serious mental illness or co-occurring disorders, the challenges are particularly great. I encourage all of you to visit the webpage that SAMHSA has set up for helping individuals, providers, communities, and states respond to the pandemic. That page is samhsa.gov/coronavirus, and I just put it in the chat box. We are all getting more comfortable with the technology that brings us all together today, even though nothing replaces personal connection. Technology can bring together people from different places, different backgrounds, and different circumstances. During today's webinar, Marty Fleetwood and Sherry Downing will encourage you to think broadly of culture. Understanding a client's culture along different dimensions can help bridge gaps and make outreach and engagement more effective. On behalf of all of us at HHRN and SAMHSA, thank you for the work you do, and we hope you find today's presentation helpful. Now, let me introduce you to our presenters. Today, we have Marty Fleetwood. She is the founder and first executive director of Homebase CCC of San Francisco and now serves as counsel. Homebase is a 50-person nonprofit legal and technical services firm working to advance solutions to homelessness. During her tenure, Ms. Fleetwood successfully developed local, regional, and national strategies to enhance both targeted and mainstream resources available to address homelessness. She has extensive expertise working with local, state, and federal government on homelessness policy, planning, and program development. She has worked with communities to implement homelessness prevention programming and to enhance access to housing and other needed services, including health and mental health care. She designs programs and facilitates startups, develops agency and community level policies, helps secure funding, and supports performance evaluation. She is known as a thought leader, systems change designer, and master facilitator among state and federal agency department heads, local elected officials, community-based agency program staff, and homeless service consumers. We are very, very happy to have Marty as a part of our team. We also have Sherry Downing with us today. Sherry is a Senior Program Manager for AHP and Deputy Director for HHRN, and she is nationally recognized for her expertise in addressing homelessness and housing issues, particularly in rural frontier areas. She has expertise in the issues that lead to and sustain homelessness in rural and urban environments, including poverty, domestic and sexual violence, trauma, chemical dependencies, mental health disorders, and co-occurring disorders. She has participated in creating several resources on a range of topics, including professional boundaries, trauma, rural opioid issues, and homelessness among various subpopulations. She currently chairs the local Public Housing Authority's Board of Commissioners. Sherry and I have worked together now for 6 years, and I've enjoyed every moment of it, so thank you. I'd like to go over our learning objectives for today. So we hope that all of you participants will be able to walk away with this as an understanding action to be taken on equity and operationalizing a system of care oriented towards racial and social equity. We hope that you will be able to improve your ability to work with a wide range of people from differing backgrounds through respectful interaction, and that it will improve your outreach and engagement skills through improved self-awareness, knowledge, and skills related to addressing the needs and culture of people experiencing homelessness. And now I'd like to move on to Marty.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. We are really glad you were patient enough with the technology today to hang out and join us. Taking action on equity is the first bit of what we're going to talk about. It's probably the most academic, shall we say, the part that you need notes for to really be able to ground yourself in what is she talking about? That's some thick information. So I created this diagram to try to make it not so thick. Action on equity really is about using a racial equity lens, understanding ourselves, which is what we're going to spend most of today talking about, understanding ourselves, because that's where these issues arise. Understanding how from ourselves and what we do and think, they infuse our institutions, the places we work, and how they then become embedded and very structural in those institutions. And while we may change jobs, move on, take our issues and personal stuff with us, we've left behind a legacy in an institution that operates in a particular way. The structure of the institution has been informed by our individual issues. So that's what we're hoping to unpack a bit. So I wanted to start with what equity is, because this is one of my pearls I would contribute to the necklace of the future. In this moment where change is possible, where we can design a future different from the past we are waking up from, equity is the condition achieved if one's race or ethnic origin is not a determining factor in your success. It becomes irrelevant. It's a background. It's a lovely thing about you, but it does not determine your success. Wouldn't that be a fabulous world to live in? So this whole concept is about focusing on achieving comparative favorable outcomes across all of us, our racial and ethnic groups, our countries we're born in, our religions we practice, whatever, by allocating resources in ways that remedy disadvantages from the past that people have suffered through no fault of their own. So, for example, Harvard University announced recently that they would be forgiving all loans for students from low-income backgrounds because they took a hard look at the racial and ethnic groups impacted by their policy of charging fees and granting scholarships, and the people with the highest incomes across our world who get into that university have the greatest chance of success, and the few people from low-income backgrounds who get in succeed but are loaded down with loans. So they're forgiving all the loans. So that is just an example of an outcome that would match what that statement is about, right? How to help people achieve favorable outcomes by allocating resources in a way that remedy disadvantages that they face through no fault of their own. The citation on there is small, but my colleague Matt Olson has loaded in the download materials box a other resources document, like an annotated bibliography, that'll let you know which slide, what the document's about, and the link is on that. So you want to make sure you download that. This slide is about really looking at how do we operationalize this concept of racial equity in a system of care. So there are key steps an institution can take, but before I go into what each of the subparts are, I wanted to focus on what a system of care is, because it's sort of jargon language, frankly. When you think about the separate efforts you take, each of you in your jobs every day, and then you reach out to other people in your community while doing your job so that you can make your work go better. So if you're an outreach worker, you're reaching out to a housing counselor to get housing for somebody that you're conducting outreach with, or you might be reaching out to somebody in the behavioral health care system to try to get an appointment for somebody in a rehab clinic. So that's where your separate effort links to someone else's effort, and that is a system of care. The system of care is your agency to the agencies you're reaching out to. It's you being the connecting person. So a system of care is sort of a way, something we create as we function, and it can be created at a top level. Your boss can meet with my boss and they can agree to sign a document saying we will work together, or it can be as informal as an outreach worker making those connections. But you're forging a system of care when you do that. And the interdependence of those connections that you create really start to build a net that is itself the system, right? So in this moment, in spring 2020, when we're living through very odd world circumstances, we're all seeing very clearly how the fate of the haves and the have-nots are interconnected, right? Very interconnected. So we are a system of people as well. So looking at the key institutional steps that can be taken to figure out how do we operationalize concepts of racial equity, they're sort of steps to take that have you looking at things that are not what you might look at every day in your job. The first one is metrics. What data would I look at? How do I measure? What am I measuring? And how do I measure it? We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. The second is implementing community processes and programs that advance racial equity. What is that going to take? What are some examples? The third is improving decision-making so that you achieve racial equity. So like my example that Harvard, it was just in the paper today, so it's on the top of my mind, what they're doing with forgiving loans for low-income students, that's a decision they made, and it's going to improve how they achieve racial equity. And then only doing informed planning that will support achieving equity. So you don't do planning that doesn't think about these issues. You do planning that focuses on these issues. So this is the data. When you're considering how do I look at data, what do I look at? The easiest data to look at is what is already being looked at in your program, the system performance measures that PATH programs collect, as do all other HUD continuum of care programs. So what's the data I collect towards those measures? For those of you who don't know what the measures are, they're things like length of time homelessness. How long has somebody in your system of care, which means in your community, experienced homelessness? How many people have been placed into a form of housing, but then we find out they've had future episodes of homelessness? What is the annual change year to year of the number of people in your shelter or transitional housing, or who are homeless overall in your community? What has been the growth in jobs and income among homeless people in your community? So those are system performance measures. And there's ways to collect them, to quantify data related to race. Again, Matt's citation document will tell you where to look to find some tools and some examples of how to do that work. It's not difficult. A lot of the data is already being collected. It just needs to be analyzed, and somebody needs to sit down and talk about what to do about it. This work around operationalizing racial equity has a lot of support and strength from the various federal government agencies who provide resources to address homelessness. So Matt's document will lead you to a toolkit that'll give you a quite comprehensive listing, not just of the departments, which you see on the screen now, but of which part of them, which sub-part of a department of the federal government, what policies and reports they have. There's links on links on links that can lead you from the law into the regulations, into the toolkits, into the TA assistance. So there's a lot of strength backing up what I'm saying very quickly because we don't have as much time as I wish we had. But at least you'll get a sense that there's a framework behind this and that you're empowered to act on it because we all do have a goal and we're trying to reach it. So because of the current pandemic, there are recent statements from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. There's a recent document addressing these issues that came out and was updated on April 3rd that includes civil rights and HIPAA issues and that really looks at fairness, equality, and compassion in how we deliver our services in this moment in time. So that's worth taking a look at. Matt's link will lead you there. The CDC in spring 2020 also issued a very action-oriented and fact-filled set of sheets that describe what's happening in the racial equity sphere while we're living through these issues and what we should do about it. Their information and their action steps are very pertinent to the work you do every day. So it's worth looking up. Again, Matt's link will help you get there. FEMA as well, providing emergency relief across the country, in April issued some documents about ensuring civil rights and racial equity in the way that their resources are used. So I want you to have that sense of strength behind you. It's not just a heart-filled or possibly area of interest for you, for some of you a passion. It's something that has the teeth of the federal government and the strength behind it to be work that we all should be doing. So to do the work, that's sort of what I just have said is sort of the institutional framework. That's the strong part of what stands behind us. To be motivated to do the work, to motivate others to do the work, we have to focus on ourselves, right? So programs, agencies, institutions working together as we form systems of care need to pay attention to these issues. The systems can collectively make a difference and can determine and direct themselves as a system to aim at equity. Right? This is like everybody agreeing, okay, we can do this and we're going to do this and we should do it. The focus of our time today, Sherry and I will now shift to us as individuals because none of this will work without the full commitment of the people involved. So Sherry, you want to get us started on the personal process?
Sure. Thanks, Marty. I appreciate that. So welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're here with us today. This is absolutely one of my favorite trainings to do because it really makes us look internally instead of just externally. So this slide is talking a little bit about shifting within ourselves to actively serve those not like us. And that takes a lot of attention to who we are and how we think and how we came to think of ourselves that way and how we see others. So I think oftentimes as human beings, we'll look at others and we'll say, like me, not like me, not like me, not like me. And we tend to gravitate toward the people who we see as more like ourselves. But what I will do today is challenge us to all look and see what we see in others that is not like that is not like ourselves, and yet if we look a little more closely, we will begin to see that virtually everybody on the planet is going to have something in common with us. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So this is my personal bias. I really believe this. To reach others, we must first know ourselves. To connect with the truth of who we are, we must engage in some activity or practice that questions what we assume to be true about ourselves. Okay, so we've all got lots of assumptions about who we are, but we don't often stop to think about it real closely. One of the things I've been very honored to be able to do over time, for several years, I put together the Way Home, which was a Project Homeless Connect / stand down event here in Helena, Montana. It drew people from all over the state. One of the things that we did was find donations and I will just say, never ask for donations if you don't like logistics, because stuff will pour down from the sky and you will be totally overwhelmed. But we would go get donations. We would get agencies that provide services that people experiencing homelessness need, and they would come with their tables and their forms and their sign-up sheets and talk to people about what they could offer. We had meals and coffee and haircuts and doctors, and one of the jobs was always for the volunteers to sit down with one of the people who had come for services and have a meal, walk with that person through all the stands to see what kind of resources might be available for him or her, clothing, walk through the giveaways, and I'm going to say that the most important part of this exercise was that we got people who would never ordinarily speak to each other to sit down and break bread together and hear each other's stories and connect. Now that's a big deal because the people connecting often were very unlike one another. And indeed, we get lovely little 70-year-old church ladies sitting down across the street from a guy who spends most of his time on a street corner with a backpack and his dog. That's a big deal because the little lady may never again cross the street to avoid the guy with the backpack and the dog, because suddenly that's John and she knows his story and he becomes more like her. So I'm just going to ask you, do you identify? So how do you identify? Do you identify as young, strong? Please feel free to write some of these in here. Do you identify as young? Do you identify as strong? Do you identify as handsome or beautiful? Do you identify as caring or kind? These are some of the attributes that we can take great pride in. And I personally still identify as young, and I am, hate to even say the number, 64, but it's a state of mind. And are you strong? And are you handsome? Are you beautiful? But these are things that will give us a lot of our confidence and our strength in ourselves. So I see a lot of you writing resilient, strong, compassionate. Love that. So I have a dear and good friend who does a lot of training about cultural competence. And one of the things that I always hear her ask is, what is your tribe? Now, she happens to be a member of a Native American tribe, but a lot of times the people who are in her classes are not necessarily Indian people. They might be, blue-eyed English, Irish, Scotch, Dutch kind of people like me, or it might be a dog mom like Baby Nandi, or a mentor, or an animal lover, or a grandmother. The truth is we all belong to a lot of tribes. And this slide kind of speaks to some of the tribes that I belong to. So I am a dog lover. I am truly an animal lover. And you will see in the middle picture on the top, my grand dog, Grizz, sitting on my son. And Grizz weighs about as much as my son, I will tell you. I've got another picture of a son and his aunt in the forest. We live in Montana in the forest. One of my tribes is definitely smart women. And so you'll see a gaggle of smart women there. One of my tribes is grandchildren. And there's one of my little grandchildren with one of his other grandmother's goats. And my son and his family is one of my tribes. And people who love books are one of my tribes. And the United Methodist Church is one of my tribes. And I will say I've got lots and lots of other tribes. And when I was teaching this class in person one day, there was a lady who didn't look anything like me. We were very different in age. We were different in race. We were different in size, everything you can think of. But, oh my goodness, she had the most gorgeous
vintage clothing on, and I knew the second I saw her that she was in my vintage clothing tribe. And we had a lovely conversation about that, and were able to connect through the rest of the conference in a way that we never would have otherwise. So I'm seeing lots of these things coming up in the our chat. So follower of Christ, I will say one of my tribes was the Walk to Emmaus community. Love my Walk to Emmaus community. Resilient and caring helper tribe. I think if you're in this webinar, you're probably in the helper tribe. I think we all are. So I'm just going to challenge you to think a little bit more about your tribe. What geographic area do you identify with? Yesterday I was looking down through this list and I said, I can't see any that I would identify with, and so we added mountains because I live in the mountains and always have. So where are you coming from? Midwest, suburban, urban coastal, rural, southern? I mean, there's just lots of ways to think about where you're from, but that gives us definitely a big part of who we are when we tell people, who are you? Who are you? Because none of us are one thing and just from one place and just one belief or value system. And so, Marty, I think I've got this one slide left and then it's back to you. So gathered here together, yes ma'am, we are outdoors people, we are crafters, we are farmers, we're readers, we're city dwellers, we're fashionistas, we're coastal, we're homebodies, we're dog lovers, we're compassionate, we are family members, we are rural, urban, frontier, Christian, I'm going to say Jewish, Muslim, and the list can go on and on and on. So, Marty, with that, I'm going to hand it right back to you.
Thank you, Sherry. That was really interesting to see how everybody thinks of themselves within the construct of what we offered you. You'll notice we didn't offer you race. We didn't offer you gender. We didn't offer you the things that in our country have been used for eons to divide people. We're looking at the things that unite people. And that is part of the future vision I would offer you. Think about what it is that you can identify with yourself that helps you unite with the broadest group possible. So the theory of social identity on which these exercises are based really is that groups that people belong to are a source of pride and self-esteem, right? They give us a sense of self-identity, social identity, a place that we belong in the world. The problem with groups is that we tend to see similarities with those who are in our group and differences with those who are outside of our group. So that's the big dividing line. Who's with me? Who's against me? This is not helping the world, right? Thinking that way we just need to leave that behind. That is like hindsight, okay? We're moving on. So we have different social identity affiliations, some that are very central to our core and not others. Some aspects of our identity can be changed. So this is an issue with the way we approach our whole field of working with people who've experienced homelessness, right? That's an identity that can be changed. You're not a person who experienced homelessness forever, or maybe you are, but the D in the word experience becomes really important. Experience, right? Leave that in the past as well. Let us get you in housing, make you part of a community, and move on. Being a homeless person or a formerly homeless person shouldn't be a big part of your identity over time, right? It's a experience you had. So to the extent it's connected to your identity, it's something that you can lose or change over time, right? People do recover. So if you've had a substance abuse issue or a serious mental illness, people recover. So these are transitory states that we move through. And the theory of social identity supports that you can get stuck with your identity in one of those states, or you can be of it, but move on. You don't have to stay there. So some aspects of identity are visible and others aren't, like the ones I was just giving as examples. Some are spoken about openly while others are not. There's a lot of stigma about them. But there's a lot of stigma about a lot of things. The 20th century is a whole history lesson in people having stigma around various conditions and issues and experiences in their life over which, frankly, most of the time they had no control. So thinking about not getting stuck in those identities, and then this amazing wheel that was created really shows all the different attributes that people can hold on to and consider a source of their social identity, right? The center of the wheel is things that are deeper. The outside of the wheel is things that communication style or work style or your income or your values, things that can change over time, your family status. So looking at all those different attributes on that slide, we don't, have time to ask you all to do an exercise of creating your own wheel. But wouldn't that be fascinating? What would you put on the wheel that describes you? What is the source of your social identity? Would you put your gardening, book club, and other things you do like archery? Would you put art lover? Would you put the connections you make to people? Would you put your family? Would you put your religion? Like, what is it that is the source of your social identity? And how much of the strength you draw from that influences how you treat others. So your social identity and what you consider your culture, the cultural background that you have, really matters a lot. It influences what you experience and the sense you make out of those experiences. So the thing about experience is that it leads to belief, right? You have some experiences based in your culture. It leads you to a belief system about yourself, your culture, and the culture of others. And those beliefs then lead to action. And frequently the action is where we can get into trouble. Culture matters a lot. This is what I studied in college eons ago. Culture influences our world in ways we're barely aware of, in what we find helpful or dangerous, how we experience mutuality, whether you find somebody reaching with wide open arms to embrace you or pat you on the back a welcome experience or something that you're like trying to run the other way from because it's not how you want to interact. What culture influenced you in your perspective on that? Do you feel respected and understood, or do you feel assaulted? And how do we decide whether someone is being genuine or real? Your culture informs you about that. There are cultures in which smiling, Americans smile a lot, by the way, on the world stage, we are smilers. There are cultures in which that kind of smiling is considered a sign of fake. That is the giveaway that you are lying, that you are trying to get something that isn't for you, that you are trying to pull something over on somebody. Culture matters so much, it's hard to even believe it. And it really matters in the bottom line on whether we can connect or not. When you can connect to some people easily, they may be sharing a lot of cultural pieces with you. And when you find other people that you can't connect to at all, it may have its same root in their cultural experience and in yours. So cultural bias is where implicit biases interact and hinder equity, right? So cultural bias that comes from your cultural tradition, but also implicit biases, they sort of blend together and they get in the way of equity. So the first couple of bullets here, stereotypes and prejudice, are about beliefs and assumptions, but they lead to action. The action is discrimination or institutionalized racism and the other isms. And those lead to outcomes, such as health disparities. So follow the flow. Stereotypes and prejudice are beliefs and assumptions. They lead to actions, discrimination, institutionalized racism, other isms, which leads to outcomes, such as health disparity. So it puts up the question for you just to think about as I turn it back over to Sherry. How much of yourself do you need to start leaving at the door? Right? How much of yourself is caught in this chain, this flow of what takes place that hinders you from true communication and connection with other human beings? Sherry?
Thank you, Marty. I love this conversation. I think just coming from what Marty just said, I think that we all have conscious beliefs. I believe that it's 65 degrees outside. I believe that the world is generally a wonderful place. I believe, I believe in the social good of all my neighbors. I believe every child should be fed and that no one should be homeless. Those are my conscious beliefs. But we all have unconscious beliefs as well. And those are some of the ones that we need to be spectacularly aware of because they're the ones that can trip us up. What's the tip of the iceberg, as they say, underneath is often bigger and certainly more hidden and certainly more dangerous. So I'm going to just sort of challenge you to think about what are some of the unconscious beliefs that we all are working from. And I will say a lot of it is taught to us from the beginning. In my culture, which is pretty much mainstream culture, you didn't talk about sex and you didn't talk about money. I mean, those were pretty much unwritten codes that I never really thought too much about until you start running into other people who are coming from a different cultural slice of the community who are saying, what did that cost and where did you buy that? And, and there are all kinds of questions that we may not consider to be appropriate or spoken aloud, as Marty was talking about, and yet they exist. And the only way to move from one part of the culture to another is with a mentor who's willing to answer your questions. I know my good friend who is a member of tribes here in Montana has been so generous with telling me some of the unwritten rules in her culture, because you can't know the unwritten rules unless somebody is willing to tell you. So if we're going to talk about the cultural iceberg, the visible pieces are the stuff that we observe immediately when we see somebody at a restaurant or at a conference or in the grocery store or in our church or wherever we happen to be. But you can see what their language is and what kinds of food they like to eat, and physical attributes and clothing and customs and gender. We can often observe from someone's jewelry or someone's dress what some of their beliefs may be, what kind of culture they're coming from. But not visible are the stuff that often means way more, that they can be weigh in more on who we are. So assumptions and perceptions and biases and values and thought patterns and politics, beliefs, history, intelligence, and I'm not going to read all these, but all of these are not visible. And I will say, for example, with all the people I've spoken to who have been experiencing homelessness over the last many years, the strength may not be immediately obvious, but it is always there. The character, imagination, skills, the light inside the human is always there, and it's our job as providers and professionals to begin looking a little bit more deeply and to become aware of someone's skills and imagination and character and worldview and sense of purpose. Unconscious bias may be something like an affinity bias. If you're like me, I like you. Or unconscious self-perception and performance, or confirmational behavior, or seeking out behavior that confirms what you already believe. 157 years ago, when I was a freshman in a college psych class, I can remember the professor saying, we tend to remember the things that we already believe and that confirm our beliefs, and we tend to not remember the things that contradict what we already believe. And I've paid attention to that, and I think there's some truth to it. We have natural preferences. we're biologically hardwired to prefer people who sort of look like us or sound like us or share our interests. Social categorization is a process by which we routinely and rapidly sort people into groups. We don't even realize we're doing it. But I do think that there's always that little predisposition to say, you're like me, you come to my group. You're not like me, you go over there somewhere. And social categorization bypasses normal, rational, and logical thinking. So I just want to underline that. We don't even know we're doing it, but it is one of the things that we're hardwired to do. And with that, I have one more slide. I always have to look because we had back and forth on this one. So experience impacts connection. So experience impacts connection. I'm just going to repeat that because I think it's really important. What we have experienced in our lives will train us and lead us to make certain assessments and assumptions about what we're coming into. So we've got historical experience. If there's interpersonal violence in there, if there's organizational behaviors and attitudes, if there's community experiences, these are all things that contribute to our social identity and help put boundaries around our social identity. So historical experience, I know, I will say, particularly with the tribes, we are seeing really difficult historical violence that has changed the cultures, many cultures over the whole breadth of our country for decades now. But there are lots of historical experiences that that lead us to the next step in our lives. So with that, Marty, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sherry. And thank you, everyone who's with us. We did start a bit late. I noticed some of the questions in the box, and some of you have had trouble with the tech issues, but if you put them in the all questions box, Zach seems to be resolving them. This recording will be made available after we're done, so you can always go back and listen to it if you missed parts of it at the beginning. So now we're moving into the end part, action on equity and the path to cultural competence. This is what we're hoping you will all join us on moving into. Culture and cultural background and all of its representations that we've been talking about are keys in determining a person's journey and their unique pathway to recovery. So it's very important to the work that you do, many of you with clients one-on-one in the field all the time, to be able to have some understanding of these things about culture, not just yours, but the person you're working with, but the person in your community, the people that you're working with to try to receive assistance and support. It's a full circle of a system of care to think about culture and backgrounds and how beliefs get in our way or how they can support us. So our goal for services is that they should be culturally grounded and very attuned and sensitive and congruent and competent, as well as personalized to meet individuals' unique needs. In the other resource document that Matt has posted, there are some really good resources that are available on this work. SAMHSA has a working definition of recovery with 10 guiding principles of recovery. They speak to culture. HHS has a Think Cultural Health e-learning program that really has some really deep work done on improving cultural competency among behavioral health professionals. So we're providing you with an introduction to the information that you can find and explore more deeply as you're moving about your work. There are cultural stumbling blocks that we come across all the time, including language. And one of the participants today has commented that using the word tribe to describe various affinities that people have is offensive to some, because tribes describes groups of people who have historic status in our country and currently live in conditions that are generally not fabulous and are leading many tribes to have real issues in the pandemic. So language can be a stumbling block depending on where you sit on the spectrum of being attuned to it. Cultural stumbling blocks frequently are the result of implicit or cultural bias or insensitivity or just doing something that hasn't been deeply thought through. Other times they're class-related values, who's allowed in and who's allowed out, depending on the class that you're in. Sherry was talking about her background. I've been struck by the change in our culture, our national culture, about how people talk about politics in my lifetime. I grew up at a time when everything was fine. Protest, demonstrate, vote, get involved in electioneering, whatever you wanted to do, good, do it. But you never told anybody who you voted for. You never asked anybody who they were going to vote for. It was like the inappropriate barrier line you didn't cross. That was really just none of your business. You could do all the work, all the promoting for candidates, put up signs in your lawn, leafleting, whatever you wanted to do, but you didn't ask people who they were going to vote for. That cultural norm might be eroding and shifting. It's just one of those changes that we live through in life. Nonverbal communications, those can be real cultural stumbling blocks. I was talking about, do you hug? Do you reach out and pat somebody on the shoulder? Do you stand and bow instead? Like, what is your culture's way of handling communication when you meet and depart from somebody? Stereotyping people, plain old racism, and ethnocentricity. The National Equity Project has some good materials about teasing out implicit and cultural bias. They are also referenced in the materials that Matt has made available. So to pause for a moment and give you a chance to put some information in the all questions box, what about unpacking the trunk? What do you find, not just in your own experience, but in the experience of the people you work with, either as clients or others in your community, particularly those that are in your system of care? What do you find is in their trunk that you feel like hinders true communication and working as well as you can together to get the job done? Like, what else do you find in your own trunk? What's in there? What personal experience have you had when you've encountered somebody who just seems resistant to giving you what you need? What do you find there? I mean, I've had people in a system of care say to me, these resources are for people like us, not for them. These are for people who've been working, not for them, those people who just, I don't know, hang out on the street. Like, I've heard that language from otherwise very caring government social workers. So it kind of made me wonder, oh, what else is in that trunk she has? Wonder if I could ever get her to unpack it. Yep, educational superiority, definitely. You know, that whole lookism thing is real true. Who looks cute? Who looks a mess? Yep, pride, family history. Yeah, trauma in many forms. Abuse within a family, abuse within your life, systems trauma from being treated poorly. Low self-worth, absolutely. Yeah, and you actually can take the time to go through thinking about all the experiences people have had and what leads them to act the way they do. I don't know, I feel like it provides me a great opportunity for empathy. Nobody seems to have actually had an easy time, no matter how privileged someone else may think they are. Everybody's got a trunk, and it informs what they do and how they do it. These are really great. I really appreciate your answers there. Thank you very much. Sherry, what do you find as cross-cultural stumbling blocks?
Oh, thanks, Marty. All right. Well, this is a little table that we found, and I will say that I think it's an interesting table because it really does talk about some of the things that we may not talk about if we're in different ethnic cultures. So under the white column, we'll see that direct eye contact during listening indirect while speaking. I would say that's probably true in our mainstream culture. The direct eye contact is often something that people watch for to see if you're telling the truth or if you're trustworthy or forthcoming. Reaching out and touching somebody can be a sign of affection, and we touch easily. You all were saying earlier, we do smile a lot. Marty was saying, you know, on the world stage, we are smilers. And I think that that's true about mainstream culture. I think touching in the white mainstream culture is also, you know, can be a sign of affection. Public behavior tends to be modest and restrained, you know, stiff upper lip and don't cry in public, and you don't want to make a scene. Emotional displays are in bad taste. I can hear my mother. Asking a new acquaintance about jobs, family, and other personal questions is friendly. That's a way to connect with people, and tolerate the use of the expression you people. Now, I will say for me personally, even though I belong in this column, my father, whenever he was in a bad mood, would you people us to death with the pointed finger. You people! And so I don't tolerate that really well. But the African American column, I will say I've got, you know, obviously I don't know if these things are accurate, but Marty and I talked about it before, and she said, yeah, you know, in general, it's sort of like indirect eye contact during listening and direct eye contact while speaking. Now, with the tribal people, I will say that it can be really rude to meet people's eyes during speaking, and is not, is a real uncomfortable thing. Touching might be offensive, emotionally intense, dynamic, demonstrative in public, hilarious, I would say, might be another word we could fit in there. Personal questions of a new acquaintance are improper and intrusive, and may consider the phrase you people racist and denigrating. Hispanic, we're going to see different things again. So avoidance of direct eye contact is a sign of respect. Sustained contact may be a challenge to authority. Tend to touch during conversations, stand closer to one another than other cultures might. Precede official or business conversations with lengthy greetings, pleasantries, and other talk. And also consider you people racist and denigrating. So if you begin to break it down this way, there's lots of ways to parse this stuff. It could be poverty culture, middle class culture, privileged culture, and you're going to see different kinds of unwritten rules there as well. And you'll probably never know that you've even broken a rule if you don't have a guide coming from one of the other classes. So just another way to think about this. There are a lot of barriers to openness, but I think one of our biggest barriers is really just discomfort. It's uncomfortable and it can feel unsafe. But uncomfortable and unsafe are really not the same thing. Uncomfortable is you feel a little queasy about asking it, or you just don't feel real like as if you belong, but you're not necessarily unsafe. But unpacking ideas and behaviors can be extremely uncomfortable. And it's important to know and state boundaries, and it's important to be open to navigating hard conversations. Be listening with your heart instead of just your ears, and beware of leveraging your safety to maintain control. So these are all interesting and good tips. I would say that some things for me as a, you know, a basic middle class, older person, female, there's a lot of things that I don't consider unsafe that other people might consider unsafe. And it's all how we perceive. I can remember one time at a meeting in Washington, D.C., it was late, it was after dinner, and we were going back to the hotel room, and there were several of us, and I was sort of in my little high heels and dress and leading the way, and actually had to walk up a street past some police who were arresting some people on the street. And I didn't even think anything of it. I just sort of went, shoulders back, tiptoeing probably across the crime scene in my high heels, never thinking a thing about it. And the policeman nodded to me and were cordial and polite. And after we got through that, several of my colleagues said, "Really? What were you thinking?" And I guess what I was thinking was, this isn't scary to me, but I didn't stop to think, given their experiences, would it be scary for them? So discomfort is going to vary by person, but uncomfortable and unsafe, again, are really not the same thing. And then the last slide I'm going to do right this minute is to talk about the assumptions of privilege. Now, I will say I was born and raised in rural Colorado, moved to pretty much rural, actually frontier Montana. There are middle class coming from, a decent background and a decent education. And the truth is, I have had a lot of privilege in my life that I have not even acknowledged or understood until I saw what it looks like for people who don't have those assumptions of privilege. We all carry things we haven't earned. So I always just assume I'm included, but we do need to stop and think about who is excluded, who's making the decisions, what are the messages, who is judged, worthy, innocent, complicit. And so if the power is in the inner circle, who is in the margins, who is out there? And I would like you to just take a few minutes to talk about who's included, who's excluded, who's judged worthy or innocent, complicit. One of the things that caught me by surprise and that I found really difficult when I first started working with the issue of homelessness is how many people really say worthy, unworthy. People are judged every single day, and it's hard, and it's one of the things that we really need to be aware of. So the affluent, the rich, gender and sexuality, absolutely, that can be big. White, older men, yep, social status. People of power include those given authority, people with a past. And then who's judged, worthy, innocent, complicit, addicts. As Oprah would say, I am always worthy. I love Oprah. Very nice. People with a criminal background, actually, yes, people coming out of homelessness, people who's coming out of jail, people who are living in egregious poverty, all of these things are often invisible to us when we are traveling under an assumption of unearned privilege. So Marty, I think that's really what I wanted to say about that. Do you want to take the next one?
Thank you, I will. So in our remaining 5 minutes, we're going to talk a bit about, oops, I skipped one, yep. Finishing up on privilege. The invisible knapsack of privilege. Think about the privileges you've had in your life that you didn't earn. They're just there. And the disadvantages that you've had. So if you want to type some answers in the chat box as you think about it. But as Americans, I just want to point out that as Americans, through the last half of the 20th century, we all carried the invisible knapsack of privilege. We lived in a nation that mostly had streets and roads, mostly had running water. Not everywhere, not every community, but mostly, predominantly, compared to many other countries on this planet that we share. We mostly had food. We had programs to support people who didn't have it. We mostly had something called clean air. So when you just think about how we live, we mostly had a country that functioned politically and our governance structures worked. They may be full of amusing anecdotes at various times, depending on what your perspective is, but we had them. So that's sort of a privilege on the world stage, because many countries, these things were not true. So in addition to those, you may have some very personal privileges to think about that you didn't earn. They just were there, like the streets and sidewalks. And you may have had unearned disadvantages, like being from a poor family. Yep. Or parents divorcing. Other issues and experiences that compromised what felt like your ability to move forward. Achieving equity takes equal access to resources, which I was bringing up those resource issues. It takes 4 things to move people out of poverty: employment, education, relationships that bridge social capital, and a vision of the future, right? These are the big things that will help somebody move out of poverty. The more of those pieces of the pie that you have, the faster you'll be able to move out of poverty. So on this slide, it gives you employment, education, relationships that bridge social capital, and a vision of the future. These are attributes of what it takes to achieve equity. And when you think about those resources, you can think about the resources you have in your pie or that you don't have. Like, what are some resources that you have available to you, and what are some that you don't? And then when you're working with the people that you serve in a community, what do they have, and what do they not have? So we're in the interest of moving forward on the time we lost at the beginning, we're not going to spend time answering all the questions, but it gives you a sense of things to think about. What I really urge you to do is, in this moment in particular, act as if it is possible to transform the world. Really focus on what you want the world to be and feel like for yourself and those around you. Kate, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Marty. We don't have time for questions, but I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining us and for the wonderful comments that have been put in the public chat box. We had one question that we will address after the email and after the webinar, and I believe that Marty addressed, hope your concern. Let's